When you think about global power, what comes to mind? Probably things like warships, big trade summits, fiery speeches at the UN. But what if I told you the real power, the most decisive power, isn't debated in parliaments at all? What if it's quietly hammered out in some technical committee somewhere? What if the rules that actually shape our world aren't laws passed by politicians, but things like file formats, communication protocols, even the size of a shipping container? Well, today, that's what we're digging into. We're exploring the hidden architecture of the global economy, standards. These are the invisible rule books that decide who gets to trade, who can connect, and when it comes right down to it, who really holds the power. So take a look at something like a barcode on a product, or think about the format of a SWIFT message that zips money between banks. On its own, it just seems like, boring administrative data, right? But it's not. In reality, it's a passport. Yeah, a passport. It's this little certificate of compliance that basically tells this huge global system of ports and banks and servers, hey, I belong here, you can trust me. So if your product or your payment has the right passport, it just sails around the world, no problem. But if it doesn't, it just hits a wall, stops dead. So in this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly how these little technical agreements turn into global mandates. And maybe more importantly, how that quiet authority is now becoming a huge battleground for geopolitical competition.
Okay, so that brings us to the big question, right? How in the world does some voluntary technical guideline, something probably cooked up by engineers just to solve a simple problem, how does that become this inescapable global rule? What's the secret sauce? What makes a rule like that stick?
Well, at its most basic level, a standard is really just a shared agreement. It's all about creating predictability. Just try to imagine a world without them for a second. A shipper in Korea would have to negotiate container sizes with a port in Rotterdam for every single shipment. A bank in Brazil would need some custom-built process just to talk to a bank in Japan. It would be absolute chaos, slow, super expensive, and really risky. And that's what standards solve. By investing just once in a shared rulebook, everyone in the network can coordinate way more efficiently. And crucially, trust that the other side is speaking the same language. It's basically a tool for scaling trust. But here's where it gets really interesting. Standards aren't just efficient, they have this kind of gravity to them. The source material points out this really powerful dynamic. With every single new person or company that adopts a standard, it becomes more valuable for everyone else already using it. You've probably heard of this. It's what economists call a network effect. So as that network of users gets bigger and bigger, the reason to join becomes overwhelming. And that whole need to bargain over the rules with every new partner, it just evaporates. Think about it. You don't negotiate with the internet protocol, right? You just use it. The standard becomes the default. It becomes the only practical way of doing business. All right, so let's go a little deeper. Let's look at the core mechanics that turn these voluntary agreements into something that feels, for all intents and purposes, like a law. What are the economic forces that give standards this incredible, sticky power? So the source analysis we're looking at breaks this down into 4 key economic functions. First up, they reduce uncertainty. If you know every part is going to fit or every message will be understood, it's way easier to get financing or insurance for your project. Second, they create those powerful network effects we just talked about. Third, and this is a big one, they enable gatekeeping. The group that gets to certify compliance with a standard, whether it's for something like organic food or cybersecurity, well, they get to control who gets into the market. And fourth, and this might be the most important one of all, standards translate policy into plumbing. Think about it. A government can pass any law it wants, but that law is just an idea, just words on paper, until it's coded into the actual technical systems, the pipes and the valves, that manage the real-world flow of goods and money. Okay, so once a standard is really embedded in that global plumbing, trying to change it becomes incredibly difficult. And this is all because of something called switching costs. Just think about what it would take. It's not just, learning a new rule. No, it's retraining your entire staff. It's rewriting all your software from the ground up. It's retooling your factories. It's rebuilding decades of business relationships. The combined cost of all of that, it creates this kind of invisible fortress around the existing standard, and it effectively locks everyone inside. And this whole process of lock-in, it usually happens in about 3 stages. First, you have the pilot phase. This is where a small group of early adopters starts using a new rule to solve a problem they all share, but more efficiently. Then you get to the credibility phase. This is where some respected industry group or maybe a government agency comes in and certifies the standard, giving it a big stamp of legitimacy. That's the signal to the whole market that, hey, this thing is a safe bet. And finally, you hit the lock-in phase. This is when the entire ecosystem, vendors, consultants, software developers, educators, they all build their own businesses around that standard. And at that point, it's not a choice anymore. It's just the foundation of the industry. It's how things are done. And this leads to a really profound point from the source material. Once a system is locked in, your freedom isn't about your ability to choose something else. Your freedom is defined by how much it costs to leave the system you're in. And if that cost of exit is just ridiculously high, then you don't really have a choice, do you? You are, for all practical purposes, being governed by that standard's rulebook.
Okay, so we've seen how this technical plumbing gets locked in. Now let's look at the next step. How does that plumbing transform into actual real-world geopolitical power? When do these quiet technical rules start acting, well, like rulers?
You see, during times of relative peace and cooperation, we tend to think of standards as just neutral infrastructure. They're like public highways, right? They're open to everyone and they just make life more efficient. But the analysis in our source says, hold on, that neutrality is conditional. Because when geopolitical tensions rise, those neutral highways suddenly become decidable lanes. The choke points in the system, the clearinghouses, the certification bodies, the folks who own the protocols, they can suddenly be used to grant or deny access. They can be used to enforce sanctions or to give priority to allies. The plumbing is literally forced to pick a side.
And when that happens, you get a very clear set of winners and losers. The winners? Well, they're the gatekeepers who control the standard, of course, and the big established players who have the money and lawyers to navigate all the complex rules. But the losers? The losers are often the most dynamic parts of the economy. We're talking about new companies who can't afford the price of admission, smaller exporters from developing countries, and innovators, the people with new tech or new business models that just don't fit neatly into the old established rulebook. So the standard that was once created to enable commerce now becomes a giant barrier. And this just brilliantly illustrates one of the core arguments from the source. Policy follows the plumbing, not the speeches. I mean, think about it. A politician can announce sanctions all day long, but they're not real, they don't have any bite until the global banking system, SWIFT, actually flips the switch and implements them. You can sign a big climate accord, but it only has teeth when its rules get baked into carbon accounting standards and supply chain certifications. Power isn't just declared from a podium, it has to be engineered right into the plumbing.
So here we are. We've got this incredibly powerful, super efficient global system, and it's all built on a handful of dominant standards. Sounds great, right? But what's the downside? What's the price we pay for all this order? And what happens when the whole system comes under stress?
And this leads us to a really crucial paradox. How can a system that's designed for maximum efficiency also be a source of incredible fragility? Well, the drive to create that single, seamless, universal standard means we get rid of all the backups, all the redundancies. We basically create a system where everything depends on everything else working perfectly, all the time. Now, during normal times, this hyper-interconnectedness is a thing of beauty. It's a marvel of efficiency. But a crisis, a pandemic, a financial panic, a major war, it acts like a giant stress test on the whole system. And it suddenly reveals all these hidden dependencies, all these places where power is concentrated in just a few critical choke points. All of a sudden we realize, whoa, the entire global supply chain relies on one shipping lane. Or hey, global finance depends on just a handful of these clearinghouses. The very thing that makes the system so efficient in peacetime becomes its biggest vulnerability in a crisis. But there's a really powerful counter-argument here, which the source brings up. A dominant standard. Let's take the US dollar and global finance as a perfect example. It has this incredible defense mechanism, its own usefulness. The sheer amount of value, the liquidity that's constantly flowing through the system, it creates this massive incentive for everyone involved to keep it going.
That river of money, it's like the world's loudest lobbyist, pushing back against anyone who tries to destabilize or weaponize the standard too much. So, the analysis suggests that this fear of, killing the golden goose, it often stops the system's controllers from using their power to the absolute fullest. Okay, so we've got this complex dance between efficiency, power, and fragility. So what are the big takeaways here? As we look to the future, how should we be thinking about building and governing these massive systems that, let's be honest, pretty much rule our world?
Yeah, so what are the lessons? Because understanding this hidden world of standards, it's not just some academic exercise, right? It has huge, real-world implications for policymakers, for businesses, for innovators, for all of us. The source material wraps up by offering what it calls 3 gentle lessons for how to navigate this new era of competition over standards.
Okay, lesson number 1, design for graceful exits. Basically, instead of building systems designed to trap everyone inside, maximum lock-in, we should focus on interoperability. We should build clear off-ramps. That way, you reduce the risk of being stuck in just one system. Lesson 2, price the hidden tolls. Adopting a new standard might seem free at first, but it almost always comes with these long-term costs. You lose flexibility, maybe some sovereignty. We need to be way more transparent about what those trade-offs actually are. And third, audit the choke points. We have to actively find and monitor the most critical spots in our global systems so we actually understand where the power is concentrated and where the biggest risks of failure are hiding. And here's a final thought to leave you with. It's really worth remembering that these huge systems of power, they feel invisible to us for one simple reason. They work so well, but that smoothness, that convenience, it's not neutral. Every single time you tap your credit card, or track a package online, or stream a video, you are participating in and reinforcing a specific standard. You're casting a tiny implicit vote for a particular rulebook, and by extension, you're voting for the values and the interests of the people who wrote. And that brings us to the final, and maybe the most important question of all. Because right now, new technologies are emerging. AI, quantum computing, synthetic biology, you name it. And for all of them, new global rulebooks are going to have to be written. The fights over these future standards, they're going to shape the 21st century just as much as any treaty or any election. So the real question for all of us is, who gets a seat at the table this time? Who gets to write the next rulebook for our shared future?